Good afternoon, everyone. So the paper I will present is the result of a research collaboration between researchers of different schools and departments at the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment at UCL. And
excuse me, Nicolas.
Yeah.
Would you be able to come to presenter modes? We can see your notes right now.
You can see my slides?
Yes, but we can see also notes section. Would you be able to?
That's right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
No worry. Fantastic. Thanks for letting me know. So I was saying that it's a collaboration between different departments. A couple of the researchers are also participating on the session, so if they might be jumping on to answer some of the questions at the end of the presentation as well. This research, I have to clarify, is descriptive and exploratory rather than explanatory on the subject of urban manufacturing, which is also an understudied subject in the case of London. In recent years, there has been an important revival of small-scale manufacturing, mainly because of the benefits of urban locations, which include closeness to cheap and specialist labor, shorter distances to suppliers or businesses, and a large customer space, right? And this is also referred to as the agglomeration economies, right? And we can observe, for example, on those examples on that pictures, that this has taken different shapes. In some cases, it has gone into a much more formalized case where you see, for example, in this case, on the ground floor, units of industrial use, and on the upper stories, residential units, or other cases which are more, so to say, temporal type of businesses, where a digital fabrication lab it's set up on this type of developments, which are containers, for example, in the borough of Tower Hamlets in the east of London. So we wanted to investigate this with more detail, and to try to find out how was this smaller manufacturing embedded in the built fabric of the city, and in London in this particular case. So the important question that arises is if manufacturing belong to mixed urban environments, right? And that is the driving question of the whole research. So our methodological approach was to look at two existing data sets that could help us find this answer to this question on mixed-use environment, looking at the urban form. And this has to do with the available data sets related to standard industrial classification of economic activities, and an approach looking at urban form from a spatial configuration perspective, and specifically using the space syntax approach, right? So one of the problems that we encounter, one of the research problems that we encounter was the definition of urban manufacturing itself, because contemporary urban manufacturing is comprised of several threads of types of manufacturing that we have still present in the core, at the core of cities. The traditional, some traditional manufacturing activities. We have the new manufacturings that have been generated due to the implementation of new technologies, and we have a sort of like a layer or a sort of like a type of manufacturing that is in between service and manufacturing, that is quite difficult to define, and precisely the classification standards available are not very good at reflecting these ambiguities, right? So we somehow inherited that problem from existing data sets. And the other research problem that we encountered is intrinsic to the urban manufacturing itself as an urban activity, because typically industrial uses and urban manufacturing is considered a land use of less value, and therefore it has been replaced or displaced from central areas that are being occupied by much more by land uses that in a way pay better for those locations, and so therefore there has been a sort of like a loss of urban manufacturing, and even though there are some planning policies in place that are supposed aiming at protecting this industrial land, they are not necessarily doing so at such a fine-grained scale, at the scale that we were aiming to investigate, which is the scale of the mixed-use environment. So in a way, this highlighted the problem for us to investigate this data at high spatial resolution. So in the case of the manufacturing data sources, we looked at these three available data. Two of them, the two top ones on this table, are open data sources, and the third one was provided to us by a study that came from the Greater London Authority, and they in a way represented three types of city scales, and especially the first one was quite promising because it was a point data base that presented the registered address or the trading address. Even there it says registered address. We also studied the trading address, so it fitted quite well in our questions of investigating the building types, for example, at the level of the mixed use environment. The other one, the business, corresponds to a survey, an employer survey conducted by the Office for National Statistics. That is it has a less spatial granularity because it's at the lower super output area, and as I mentioned, the one that was provided by the study by the Greater London Authority has to do with the definition of these areas that are protected by these planning policies of industrial land. And here we had the definition of the definitions of industrial sites, right? And with regards to the other thread, the spatial configuration approach, we had we conceptualized this as four metrics of urban movement, two of them representing pedestrian movement and two representing vehicular movement. So in total, this in a way could help us identify or answer, provide some answer to questions such as if urban manufacturing was concentrated in main thoroughfares, around town centers, or in back streets, etc., etc. So having the first three manufacturing data sets combined with these four urban form metrics, we build up this manufacturing matrix to explore the data on an interactive map platform that was shared online with the research team that work as it is shown. Hopefully you're able to see it. I'm not sure if you're able to see it or not, but that work with the basic interactive functionalities, but essentially it enabled us to scrutinize the data at a quite high spatial resolution and investigate across all the research team what could be what the data was telling us, and what could be the findings or the patterns of urban manufacturing that were represented by each of these data sets. And what we found at the block scale, for example, we were quite surprised.
Nicolas, Can I interrupt you for a moment? There's a couple of messages in the chat. Could you hide the message that's at the bottom of your screen for sharing? I think there's an EU there. And Nilufer would like you to close the collaborate panel with the X button, the purple X.
Yep.
How about now? Is it okay?
So
now to return to so you may need to share your screen again because
okay, but to be able to share my screen again, I need to open up the collaborate panel.
Okay. Yes.
But I'm still sharing my screen, right? Or
just click on the background slide.
Okay,
in the background.
I close here and I click on the background slide.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry for the interruption. Thank you.
No problem. Where you're able, should I go back or no? Should I just continue? No.
That's perfect from there. Yes, we've got everything from there.
Okay, good. So I was saying about the findings related to the patterns that we found at the different scales. So for example, businesses pointed data, and we were quite surprised to find quite a high concentration of manufacturing businesses in the area of Mayfair, for example, which was something that wasn't necessarily expected. And on the other hand, in the area of what is named as the Maker Mile in Street, in the border between Tower Hamlets and Hackney, there were very few, or many less than what we were expecting, for example. Then if we move on to a different scale, to the lower super output area, and this is the employment survey, again, the data shows some anomalies and some inaccuracies, because, for example, here in the area of Victoria, next to St. James Park, or next to, very close to Buckingham Palace, it shows a very high concentration of 6,000 jobs, for example. But at the same time, the same data set is quite accurate in showing us that in Park Royal, which is a well-known industrial and planned industrial site, it shows us a concentration of 4,500 jobs. So it wasn't very clear for us. Then we realized that none of these data sets was very helpful in that sense to answer our main research question. Although at the metropolitan scale, the general patterns described mainly by the businesses dataset, the deployment dataset, and the industrial land dataset seems to be more accurate. Nevertheless, they were less relevant for investigating, as I said, the mixed-use urban environments that we were seeking to look at. So, for example, here we can see the high concentrations along the Lee Valley or along the Thames Gateway, right? Or the Vandalay Valley, or, as I mentioned before, the Park Royal. But there are still some, for example, concentration as the employment survey shows, or as the businesses point data shows, concentration of urban manufacturing in central London that is not reflected on the other data sets. So in summary, urban manufacturing still remains a complicated subject of study. The definition itself of the subject of the activity is being further questioned by new types of manufacturing, triggered by new technologies that in a way are making the definition of manufacturing even more ambiguous. And official data sets, although they might be good for studying manufacturing at the regional level or at the metropolitan level, not very good at doing so at the block level or at the building type level, right? Even so, the interactive mapping that we used was quite useful to scrutinize the data at a fine-grained scale. we then, in the subsequent stages of the research, we in a way did exercise help us select further cases of study where we did much more groundwork, field work, and in a way the study of mixed use environments perhaps will require those type of approaches, or a combined approach of using existing data sources or big data approaches with field ground approaches to really extract what is there. Otherwise, as I demonstrated, as I showed with those examples, it's very likely that there will be some errors in the results. This is for both, either for the point data that we analyze and the employment survey data that we analyze, with the example, for example, of the Victoria case near Buckingham Palace. So for both the levels of spatial resolution. And overall, also, even though there's these planning policies in place that are supposedly there to protect industrial land or urban manufacturing, they are less likely to be doing so at the fine grained scale where, for example, the mixed urban environments tends to unfold. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. If the audience has some questions, please type them in the chat and I can ask them directly to Nicolas. In the time when we are waiting for potential questions, just a little bit about your web visualization there, where you explored the patterns of urban manufacturing. How did you approach that with different members of staff? So you needed to get different people looking at the same map, looking for patterns. How did you approach that task to ensure some type of non-biased, or at least a consistent approach to spotting the patterns?
Okay, that's a very good question. That doesn't have a very good answer, I will say, because it wasn't very controlled, I have to say. This interactive platform, it's alive, it's still even available, and there's no control to guiding how these patterns are to be interpreted. So every member of the staff, every member of the research team was coming with their own perspectives to interpret this data, which will, on the other hand, I thought it was quite useful, because at the end they were quite free to come up with their own interpretations without necessarily this sort of like a prescribed way of looking at the data.
That is a good answer. Yeah, I agree. I think rather than control too much, to allow people to use their own intuition to look into those maps. Again, a last chance probably for some audience questions. If you could type them directly into the chat. Just a simple question in terms of extending the work. Have you any plans to do this analysis for another city or another area, to see if maybe it's as difficult to spot urban manufacturing, or it's easier depending on the data and depending on the geography of the city?
Not in the short term, I will say, but it will be quite interesting, because at least the point data that I show you is quite used by several researchers and many research across the world, one could say, but it's used at the much more regional or city level. But when you go deeper into investigating neighborhoods, which is what we wanted to investigate, right? There's where it starts to show inaccuracies, right? So it will be quite useful, I think, to do this same analysis, and it wouldn't take that much more effort, because the data is there, and you would compare, for example, with with other data sources such as historical maps, for example, that do show, for example, if you had a look at Victorian maps, for example, the exact locations of where woodworks were, or where other manufacturers were, with quite precise locations. So it will perhaps give some guidance on how to approach this type of research in other industrial cities, and it will, yeah, be quite interesting.